They say moving to a new city is the perfect chance for a fresh start. But for me, it was the beginning of a countdown that almost ended in tragedy. It was February 2021. I just moved into a ground floor studio in an old building in North Chicago. The place had high ceilings and massive windows that looked directly out into a side alley, dark, narrow, and damp. At first, I loved the bohemian vibe of the place, but that feeling evaporated as soon as Valentine's week began. It all started with the flowers. On Monday, I found a single red rose on my welcome mat. No card, no return address. I figured it was just a delivery mistake. On Tuesday, there were 3 roses. On Wednesday, a full bouquet. But what chilled my blood wasn't the flowers themselves. It was a tiny detail. The bouquet was tied with a blue silk ribbon, the exact same shade of blue as the curtains I had just hung in my bedroom the day before. Someone was watching me. On the night of February 13th, my fear turned from a suspicion into a physical presence. I was finishing dinner when I heard a metallic sound, a rhythmic light scratching against my window pane. I froze, my fork suspended in midair. The sound was coming from the alley. I approached the window, keeping the lights off so I wouldn't be seen, and peeked through a tiny slit in the curtains. I didn't see anyone, just the wet shimmer of the asphalt and the flicker of a distant, dying streetlight. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or a stray cat. But on Valentine's Day, the 14th, I received a text from an unknown number. "You look beautiful when you're afraid. Happy Valentine's Day, Laura." My name is Laura. I hadn't given my number to anyone in that neighborhood yet. I felt the walls of that studio closing in on me. I called a friend, Mark, and begged him to spend the night. I couldn't be alone. Mark arrived at 8 p.m. His presence gave me a bit of courage. We had dinner, put on some music, and tried to normalize the situation, thinking maybe it was just a sick joke from a resentful ex. But around 11:30 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. Mark went to the kitchen for a glass of water and suddenly stopped dead in front of the window. "Laura, come here, slowly," he whispered in a voice I had never heard from him before. I walked over. Through the thin fabric of the curtain, I could see a silhouette. A pale hand was pressed firmly against the glass. It wasn't knocking, it was just sitting there, as if it were claiming ownership of the window. Mark, losing his patience, yanked the curtain open to confront the intruder. There in the alley stood a man. He wasn't a vagrant or a thug. He was wearing an impeccable but wrinkled suit, holding a box of chocolates in one hand and a long, shiny kitchen knife in the other. His face was a mask of madness. He was grinning from ear to ear, but his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and fixed entirely on me, completely ignoring Mark's presence. "Open the window, Laura. I prepared our dinner," he said. His voice was a raspy whisper that cut through the glass with terrifying clarity. Mark pulled out his phone to call the police, and at that moment, the man lost it. He began slamming his head against the glass. Not his hands, but his own forehead. Thud, thud, thud. The glass began to spiderweb. He was screaming that I was a traitor, that he had watched me every night since I arrived, and that he knew I had been waiting for him. It took the police 6 minutes to arrive, but for me, it felt like hours of absolute terror, watching the blood from his forehead smear across the glass that separated us. When the sirens finally echoed through the alley, the man didn't try to run. He simply sat down on the ground, opened the box of chocolates, and started eating them compulsively while staring at us and laughing. It turned out the man was a former tenant of the building who had been evicted after a violent psychotic break months earlier. He had a spare key to the alley gate. When the police searched him, they found photos of me in his pockets, photos of me going for a run, entering the grocery store, and even a photo taken through my window while I was sleeping the week before. Today, I live on the 12th floor of a building with 24-hour security. But every Valentine's Day, when I hear the wind rattle the glass, my heart stops. Because I know that somewhere out there, he still thinks we have a dinner date pending. On Valentine's Day 2022, I was single and honestly a bit fed up with dating apps. I decided I wasn't going to sit at home moping, so I put on my favorite dress and booked a table for one at a cozy French bistro downtown. I just wanted to enjoy a good dinner and a glass of wine by myself. However, the night took an unexpected turn when the waiter approached with a bottle of high-end champagne. "Compliments of the gentleman at the table behind you," the waiter whispered. I turned around and saw Ethan. He was a sharp-looking man, early 30s, piercing eyes, and a smile that could melt anyone. He invited me to sit with him, and although my instinct is usually cautious, his charm was overwhelming. We had dinner, we laughed, and for a moment, I thought I'd had the most incredible stroke of luck. But the charm started to crack when we left the restaurant. Ethan insisted on walking me to my car. As we walked, he started making very specific comments. "I like how that dress fits you today, even better than when you wore it last Tuesday," he said casually. I stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't know him last Tuesday. I hadn't told him where I worked or what I'd done the week before. The chill I felt wasn't from the February wind. It was a visceral fear crawling up my spine. I picked up the pace toward my car, but he grabbed my arm. His grip was firm, almost painful. "You don't have to leave so soon, Clara. The night is just getting started," he said. His voice wasn't seductive anymore. It was possessive. I managed to break free, got into my car, and locked the doors immediately. He just stood there under the amber streetlight, staring at me with a blank expression, not blinking once. I started the car and drove toward my house, checking the rearview mirror every 10 seconds. 2 blocks later, I saw it, a black sedan following me at a constant distance. No matter how many turns I took or how much I accelerated, the car was always there, like a shadow. I decided not to go home. I didn't want him to know where I lived. I drove toward the nearest police station, but on the way, Ethan did something that made me panic. He started lightly bumping the back of my car while we were moving. It was a game of cat and mouse. Every time I tried to call 911, he would speed up and pull alongside me, forcing me to swerve to avoid a crash. I could see him through the window. He was laughing as if it were the funniest thing in the world. At a red light, he jumped out of his car and ran toward mine. He started pounding on my window with something metallic, screaming that he just wanted to finish our date. I managed to blow through the light and skidded into the police station parking lot, honking my horn like crazy. When Ethan saw the officers coming out of the building, he pulled a U-turn and vanished into the night. When the police investigated the name he had given me, they found out Ethan didn't exist. The restaurant cameras showed he wasn't even dining there. He'd been sitting alone, waiting for me to arrive, and had been following me from my office 3 days prior. The most terrifying part was what the officers found at the spot where he had parked his car near the restaurant. A roll of duct tape, zip ties, and a camera full of photos of me taken from a distance throughout the entire week. The U-turn he pulled in front of the police station wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my paranoia. The police were never able to identify him because the license plates on the car had been stolen from a scrapped vehicle months earlier. Ethan vanished into the shadows of the city, but he left a trail of terror in my life. For the next few weeks, my phone didn't stop receiving calls from private numbers. Sometimes when I answered, there was only silence. A heavy breathing that lasted 10 seconds before hanging up. One morning, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside, there was no note, just a photo of me entering my own apartment building, taken from the building across the street. He knew exactly where I lived. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear that he was waiting in the hallway or watching my window was consuming me. I sold my furniture, canceled my lease, and moved to another city 4 hours away. I had to change my phone number, close all my social media accounts, and ask my company to transfer me to a different branch. Even though I've rebuilt my life, the psychological damage is permanent. Every time I see a black sedan or someone tries to be a little too nice to me in public, my body goes into high alert. The guy was never caught. He's still out there, probably looking for another woman who, like me, just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner on Valentine's Day. I learned the hard way that the perfect gentleman can be the last person you'll ever see if you don't look closely at the cracks in his mask. There's a fine line between romance and obsession, and I crossed it without realizing it on Valentine's Day 2023. I'd been dating David for barely 3 weeks. I met him at a coffee shop. He was an architect, cultured, and extremely attentive. For our first Valentine's celebration, he decided to go all out and booked a suite at a luxury hotel on the outskirts of the city. I was excited. I felt like I had finally found an old-fashioned man. We arrived at the hotel at sunset. The suite, number 302, was beautiful, but David started acting strangely as soon as we crossed the threshold. He became obsessed with privacy. He closed the curtains tight, unplugged the room phone, and asked me to turn off my cell phone so no one would interrupt our moment. Although it seemed excessive, I agreed, thinking he just wanted to be romantic. Dinner was perfect until it came time for gifts. He handed me a small, elegant box. Inside was a beautiful pearl necklace. But when he put it on me, he whispered something that stopped my heart. "Now everyone will know you belong to me, Elena." I tried to laugh, thinking it was a tasteless, possessive joke, but his gaze didn't move from my neck. He was serious, almost in a trance. At midnight, while David was showering, I felt an impulsive curiosity and a surge of fear. I opened his briefcase, which was sitting half open on the desk. I didn't find architectural blueprints. I found a notebook full of newspaper clippings about missing women in different states, and underneath it all, a folder with my name on it. Inside were copies of my bank records, my medical history, and a copy of the key to my own apartment. Steam was coming out from the half-open bathroom door. I froze when I heard the water turn off. I had to get out of there. I tried to open the suite door, but it was locked from the inside and the key wasn't in the lock. David came out of the bathroom wearing only a towel and saw me by the door with a notebook in my hand. His expression changed from calm to cold fury in a second. "You shouldn't have looked in there, Elena. Now we have to move up the plans," he said with a calmness that made me want to scream. He approached me slowly, and I saw that in his right hand he was carrying a small bottle and a cloth. I ran toward the balcony, but we were on the 3rd floor. Desperate, I began pounding on the wall we shared with the next room, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. David grabbed me by the hair and threw me onto the bed, pressing the cloth against my face. The chemical smell was unbearable. I fought with all my strength, managing to kick the bedside lamp, which fell to the floor and caused a small short circuit, starting a fire on the carpet. The smoke triggered the hotel's fire alarm almost immediately. The deafening sound of the alarm distracted him. I used that second to hit him with a glass ashtray and run toward the door. Luckily, the hotel staff was already in the hallway evacuating people. I collapsed into the arms of a security guard, pointing toward the room 302. David didn't wait for the police. He jumped from the 3rd floor balcony into some bushes and vanished into the woods surrounding the hotel. When the police searched the suite, they found a syringe with sedatives in his briefcase and a lease for an isolated cabin in the name of a woman who had disappeared 2 years prior. They never caught David. The police discovered his identity was fake and that the real architect named David Jones lived in another country. I had to enter a victim protection program, change my name, and move states. 2 years later, I still sleep with a light on. Sometimes I receive empty emails with the subject line, Room 302. I know he's still looking for me, and I know the pearl necklace he left that night is still out there somewhere, waiting to go back around my neck. Valentine's Day. 2024 was supposed to be the first big event in my new apartment. I had moved into a high-tech smart building downtown. Everything was controlled through an app. The lights, the locks, the temperature, and the security camera system. I felt like the safest woman in the world. I had started dating Marcus, an IT specialist I met at a local gym. He was charming and helped me set up all my smart home devices. For Valentine's, Marcus told me he couldn't make it to dinner because of a server emergency, but he sent a box of wine and chocolates with a note. "I'll be watching to make sure you have fun, even if I'm not there." I took it as a cheesy, romantic comment. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on the electric fireplace, and played some ambient music through the smart speakers. Around 9 p.m., the lights in my living room started flickering. I thought it was a system glitch, but then they changed to a deep red color. Suddenly, the music stopped and a voice came through the speakers. It wasn't the virtual assistant. It was Marcus's voice, but it sounded distorted, like he was speaking through a tunnel. "That silk nightgown looks great on you, Sophia. But I think the temperature is a bit too high, don't you?" the voice said. At that moment, the thermostat shot up to 90 degrees. The heat became stifling. I tried to use my phone to regain control, but the app showed an access denied message. Marcus had changed all my passwords. I was trapped in my own home. I tried to leave through the front door, but the electronic lock made a metallic clank. It had completely deadbolted. "Where are you going, honey? Our date is just starting," Marcus said through the kitchen speakers. I realized he was watching me through the security cameras he had helped me install. I ran to the bedroom to get dressed and leave through the fire escape window, but the motorized blinds slammed shut, sealing the room in total darkness, broken only by the red light of the motion sensors. I heard a click on the living room TV. It turned on by itself. On the screen, there wasn't a movie, but a grid of camera feeds. They were shots of me from various moments over the last 2 weeks. Showering, sleeping, getting dressed. He wasn't just watching me now, he had been recording me since day one. "If you try to call the police, I'll post all of this on the building's network," Marcus threatened. I knew I couldn't win on his digital turf. I remembered the main control panel in the hallway had a physical emergency override switch behind the faceplate. I ran to the hallway, ripped the plastic cover off with my fingernails, and yanked the main power cable. The whole apartment went silent and dark. Without power, the electronic locks went into fail-safe mode and unlocked. I ran out into the building's hallway and down the stairs to the street. I went straight to the police station. When the police searched Marcus's apartment, they found no one. The place was filled with screens and servers. Marcus wasn't his real name. He was a hacker wanted for cyberstalking in 3 other states. He had used my apartment as a control experiment. Even though I reclaimed my accounts and changed the system, I never slept in that place again. I sold the apartment and moved into an old house with metal keys and manual windows. Marcus was never caught. Sometimes when I'm in a public place with open Wi-Fi, my phone gets a notification. "Do you want to pair with Marcus?" I know he's nearby, waiting for me to connect again so he can take back control of my life. In February 2022, after months of chatting with a guy named Liam, I finally agreed to meet him for Valentine's Day. Liam was the ideal man in photos, a 28-year-old paramedic with a kind smile and pictures of him rescuing animals. We talked on FaceTime, but he always had a bad connection or the camera was blurry, something my naivety justified because of his exhausting job. We agreed to have dinner at his place. He insisted on cooking for me. He gave me his address, a property in a rural area surrounded by fields and quite far from the city center. When I arrived, it was pitch black, and the silence of the countryside was unsettling. The house was dark except for some candles in the window. Liam met me at the door wearing a surgical mask. "I'm sorry, Elena, I have a terrible flu, but I didn't want to cancel our date," he told me in a very high-pitched voice, almost a whisper. As a precaution, before getting out of the car, I activated a safety feature on my smartwatch. I set a 30-minute countdown timer that, if not deactivated by me with a secret code, would automatically send a distress alert and my live GPS location to 911. Dinner was awkward. He sat far away, never took off the mask, and barely ate a bite. I started to feel like something didn't fit. The voice I heard in person wasn't the same as the one over the phone. It was twitchier, more childlike. At one point, I felt a tightness in my chest and went to the bathroom to try to calm down. When I went in, I noticed the bathroom was spotless. The medicine cabinet mirror was slightly ajar. Out of curiosity, I opened it all the way. Inside, there were no medicines. There was a blonde wig, professional special effects makeup, and most terrifyingly, a folder with printed photos of me. But they weren't for my social media. They were photos of me inside my own living room, taken through the window from my backyard. At that moment, the bathroom door slowly opened. The man no longer had the mask on. It wasn't Liam. He was a man in his 50s, bald, with a look of absolute coldness. He didn't attack me immediately. Instead, he began saying that Liam was who he wanted to be so that someone like me could love him. When he tried to block my exit, fear turned into rage and adrenaline. I grabbed a heavy marble perfume bottle from the sink and struck him hard in the temple. As he fell to the floor, dazed, I bolted out the back door into the darkness of the woods. I couldn't grab my purse or car keys that were in the dining room. As I ran through the trees, I felt my watch vibrating insistently. These were the timer notifications warning me that only a few seconds remained of the 30 minutes. I didn't stop it. I let the time run out. The moment the countdown hit 0, the watch gave a long vibration, confirming that my distress signal and real-time position had just been sent to the police. I hid in a ditch near the main road about 500 yards from the house, watching him search the edge of the woods with a flashlight. About 10 minutes later, I saw patrol lights approaching. They weren't heading to the house. They stopped exactly where my GPS signal indicated I was. I ran onto the road, waving my arms. The officers pulled me into the car, shivering and soaked. My purse and car are at that house, I told them, pointing to the dim light through the trees. The officers told me to stay in the patrol car while they called for backup and surrounded the property. They arrested the man, whose real name was Arthur, an ex-convict for stalking who lived just 2 blocks from my real house. Arthur was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The most shocking part was that he had rented that isolated cabin specifically for our Valentine's date. That night, my foresight in setting that timer was the only thing that kept me from becoming just another number in his photo collection. Valentine's Day is no longer a day of terror for me, but the anniversary of the day I regained my safety. Valentine's Day 2020 was the night I learned, well, that silence doesn't always mean you're alone. Back then, I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor. I had been dating David for months, and we had planned a romantic dinner that night. However, David had to cancel at the last minute due to a family emergency. Although I felt a bit disappointed, I decided to take the night to have a relaxing bath, watch a movie, and go to bed early. All evening, I had a strange feeling, as if the air in the apartment was heavy. I chalked my nervousness up to the loneliness of the holiday. I went to bed around 11 p.m. The apartment was completely silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. But around 2 a.m., something woke me up. It wasn't a loud noise, but a subtle movement. The mattress dipped slightly, as if someone had sat on the edge of the bed. I lay petrified, eyes closed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then I heard the worst part, a heavy, slow breath that wasn't mine, right next to my pillow. I opened my eyes just a millimeter, and through my eyelashes, I saw a shadow. There was a man crouching by my bed, watching me sleep. I didn't scream. Terror blocked my vocal cords. The man stayed there, motionless, for what felt like hours, simply breathing my air. Then I watched him slide with eerie agility downward, disappearing under my bed. The sound of his body brushing against the hardwood floor made me nauseous. I knew if I tried to run, he would catch me before I reached the door. I had to be smart. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I faked a coughing fit. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes as if I had just woken up naturally, and muttered, "I'm so thirsty." I walked to the kitchen, trying to keep my legs from shaking. Once there, instead of grabbing water, I grabbed my phone from the charger and my keys. Without looking back, I opened the front door and stepped into the hallway. I didn't close the door to avoid making noise. I ran barefoot down the stairs until I reached the street and locked myself in my car, immediately calling 911. The outcome: the police arrived in less than 5 minutes. They entered with guns drawn while I waited outside, shivering under a blanket a neighbor gave me. What they found was a technical nightmare. The man, named Thomas, was a maintenance worker for the building who had made a copy of my key months ago. When they searched under my bed, they didn't just find Thomas hiding with a pocket knife and a roll of electrical tape. They found something much more disturbing. Under the wooden frame, he had installed a small thermal camera that streamed directly to his phone. Thomas hadn't just entered that night. The recording showed he had been entering my apartment almost every night for the last 3 weeks, hiding under the bed before I got home from work, and waiting for me to fall asleep to come out and watch me up close. Thomas was sentenced to prison for aggravated stalking and trespassing. I moved that same week and developed a habit I still keep today. Every time I enter a room, no matter where I am, the first thing I do is check under the bed. Valentine's Day is now a reminder that monsters don't always break down the door. Sometimes they already have the key. On February 14th, 2019, my boyfriend Julian took me to a dinner at an old mansion he had found through a private online invitation. Julian had been acting very strange for weeks. He was pale, barely slept, and checked his phone every 5 minutes with a scared look on his face. I thought it was just nerves because he was going to propose, so I didn't think much of it and decided to enjoy the night. The mansion was completely isolated at the end of a dirt road full of trees. When we walked in, everything felt very weird. We passed through several rooms that were empty or had the furniture covered with white sheets as if no one lived there, but the main dining room was something else. house of mirrors because it was full of glass and walls that reflected everything. We arrived as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The house was impressive, made of glass and metal, but as I walked in, I felt a strange chill. The heat wasn't on. Instead, there were hundreds of lit candles reflecting in the wall mirrors, making the hallways look like they never ended. Elias was dressed very elegantly, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking, a tic I had never seen before. The table was set in the middle of a circular room where every move we made was repeated 1,000 times in the wall reflections. We ate almost without talking, hearing only the sound of forks against plates. Suddenly, Elias put his glass down and stared at me. "Love isn't just being together, Clara," he said in a voice that didn't sound like his. "Love is stopping being yourself to become part of the other person." Right then, I heard a loud thud coming from upstairs. It wasn't the sound of wood creaking. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. I tried to get up, but Elias grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. His eyes were blank, like he was in another world. "Don't ruin the moment," he whispered. I managed to break free when he got hypnotized, staring at his own reflection in the glass table. I ran up the stairs, feeling that Elias wasn't the only one in that house. When I reached the second floor, I went into the master bedroom. The walls didn't have mirrors. They were covered in photos. There were hundreds of photos of me, but they weren't normal vacation photos. They were taken in secret, through the air vents in our house, from inside my closet, or from under my bed. And in all of them, Elias appeared in the background, watching me with a totally empty face. In the middle of the room was a very large wooden box, and that's where the banging was coming from. With my heart in my throat, I opened it. No one was inside, just an old tape recorder connected to speakers hidden in the walls, playing the sound of someone struggling and hitting wood. That's when I realized how messed up Elias's head was. He had set up this whole terror scene to test me, to see if I still loved him despite the fear. I heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, slow and steady. "Clara, the reflection is more real than the person," he shouted from the hallway. I ran to the balcony, but the doors were locked with an electronic system only he could use. The house he bragged about was actually my cell. Elias walked into the room with a scalpel in his hand, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the wall with the photos. He started tearing the images in a crazy rage, screaming that I wasn't as perfect as he had imagined in his drawings. I took advantage of his breakdown to push him against one of the large mirrors. The glass didn't break, but the hit left him dizzy. I ran to the ground floor looking for the exit, but Elias had already locked down the whole mansion. I was trapped in a labyrinth of mirrors where my own reflection scared me at every corner. I spent the next 3 hours hiding in an air conditioning vent, listening to Elias walk through the house, breaking every mirror one by one, screaming my name, begging for forgiveness, and then a second later, threatening to finish the job. Help came because the house's security system, which Elias had messed with so much to lock the doors, had a short circuit that caused a fire in the basement. The smoke set off the alarm connected to the nearest fire station about 30 kilometers away. When they arrived and broke down the steel door, they found me passed out in the kitchen from the smoke. They found Elias in the round room sitting in the middle of thousands of pieces of broken glass, using a piece of mirror to try and draw my face on his own skin, cutting himself. Elias was diagnosed with schizophrenia and a serious personality disorder. He was locked up in a mental hospital for criminals, where he remains today. He could never explain why he had been secretly watching me for years while pretending to be the ideal husband. The police discovered that he had built the house of mirrors with money he stole from his clients, and that he had plans to build 3 other identical houses in other states. I divorced him while he was in the hospital, but the law couldn't take the trauma out of my head. Today, I live in a tiny house where I don't have a single mirror. I do my hair in front of surfaces that don't reflect well, and I try not to go to places with large windows. Elias never left the hospital, but every February 14th, I get a letter from the clinic with a drawing by him. It's the floor plan of a perfect room with no doors or windows, and in the center, it has my name written thousands of times in tiny letters. I know that in his mind, we are still at that dinner, and he is still trying to finish his masterpiece. On February 14th, 2021, I agreed to a blind date with a man named Hugo. We met on a dating app, and after several weeks of talking, we decided to go to a very famous steakhouse downtown. It was a crowded place with live music and plenty of light, the kind of spot where you feel safe because there are witnesses everywhere. Hugo arrived on time. He was a handsome guy wearing a black leather jacket and had a very soft voice. Dinner was going great. Hugo was funny, made me laugh, and seemed very interested in my job at the bank. However, halfway through the night, I started noticing something strange. Hugo kept looking at the large mirror behind our table. Every time the waiter came over to bring water or bread, Hugo would abruptly change the subject or lower his voice until the employee left. I thought maybe he was shy or wanted privacy, but a gut feeling that something wasn't right started growing in my stomach. At one point in the night, I went to the bathroom to freshen up. As I was leaving the stall, a woman washing her hands looked at me through the mirror and said, without facing me, "Your boyfriend dropped this when you left." She handed me a small folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I felt my blood turn to ice. It wasn't a love note, it was an ATM receipt from that same afternoon. But on the back, someone had handwritten my full address, my car model, and a list of my work hours. I left the bathroom trying not to panic. When I returned to the table, Hugo smiled and asked if I was okay. "Yes, just a bit tired," I lied. While he kept talking, I discreetly looked at his jacket, which was hanging on the back of his chair. Through an opening in the inside pocket, I saw the edge of something metallic. It wasn't a cell phone. It was a credit card scanner, the kind used to clone data. In that second, everything made sense. Hugo didn't want a date. He was collecting information to steal my identity, or something worse, taking advantage of the fact that I worked at a bank and handled access codes. The worst part came next. Hugo took my hand and said, "I have a surprise for you in the parking lot, something I bought to celebrate this day." I knew that if I left that restaurant with him, I wouldn't make it back home. With my hands shaking under the table, I took advantage of him calling the waiter for the bill and sent a text to the restaurant manager through the WhatsApp order number on the menu. I wrote, "Table 12, The man with me has a weapon or something dangerous. Please call the police quietly." The restaurant staff was very smart. The manager walked over and said there was a problem with Hugo's card and needed him to come to the office for a moment. Hugo, trying not to make a scene in front of all the couples, went with him. As soon as they crossed the kitchen door, 2 police officers who were dining nearby and had been alerted by the waiters detained him. When they searched Hugo, they didn't just find the card scanner and the list with my data. In his car, they found a suitcase with several sets of fake license plates and lock-picking tools. Hugo wasn't named Hugo. He was a con artist with several arrest warrants who sought out women working in the financial sector to get information under the guise of a romance. The most terrifying part was that when reviewing the restaurant's cameras, the police saw that Hugo hadn't arrived alone. There was another man at a distant table who didn't stop filming me with his phone throughout the dinner. That second man was never caught. Hugo went to jail, but I quit my job and moved to a different city. To this day, I have never accepted a date with someone I don't know in person. Valentine's Day is now the day I celebrate my instinct because that note in the back. On February 14th, 2023, I decided to give Mateo a chance, a guy I met on a dating app a week earlier. Mateo claimed to be a chef at a luxury restaurant. He loved gastronomy and had photos cooking amazing dishes and traveling through vineyards. We talked for hours through messages, and I felt very comfortable with him. He seemed like the perfect man. For our first date, he suggested something different. So I don't like crowded restaurants on Valentine's Day. Plus, I work in one and want a break from the noise. How about I prepare something special and we go to a lookout point I know to have a quiet dinner watching the city lights? It seemed like a romantic and authentic plan, so I agreed. He picked me up in a gray car, very clean and modern. Mateo was as handsome as in his photos, wearing a stylish dark shirt and smelling very good. During the drive, the conversation was very easy. He told me about his recipes, his passion for chef knives, and I told him about my family. After about 20 minutes of driving, we started going up into the hills. The road became narrow and dark, but he drove with great confidence. Finally, we reached a flat area with a view of the entire city lit up. There was no one else there. We got out of the car and leaned on the hood to look at the view. It was a bit cold, so he offered me his jacket. At that moment, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was a message from my sister asking if I was okay. Just as I was about to reply, I saw through the car's rearview mirror that another vehicle with its lights off was slowly parking behind ours. My instinct kicked in. "Is someone with you?" I asked with a trembling voice. Mateo didn't look at me. His kind smile completely vanished and he pulled out a knife, pressing it against my side. "Relax, just hand over your phone and unlock your banking apps or I'll cut you right here," he whispered in a cold voice that froze my blood. Two men with covered faces got out of the other car. They dragged me into the back seat of the other vehicle, tied my hands with plastic zip ties that cut into my skin, and put a cloth bag over my head. Mateo got in with them, and they started driving. For the next 6 hours, I lived through hell. They forced me to use my fingerprint and my passwords on every app. They went into my savings account, my credit card, and even took out a quick loan in my name. Every time the system was slow to process, one of the men would hit me in the ribs or pull my hair violently, screaming at me not to try and trick them. The most terrifying part was hearing them argue. Since I had seen their faces before the bag went on, one of them told Mateo, "Why should we let her go? She already saw us. She's a risk." I felt my life ending right there. They didn't release me out of kindness. Around 3 a.m., the car suddenly stopped because they heard a police siren in the distance and panicked. They opened the door, and while the car was still moving, they violently pushed me out. I fell onto a dirt and stone road. I fractured my arm and ended up with my face full of scrapes and bruises from the impact. They left me there without shoes, without a coat, and bleeding in the total darkness of a wasteland. I had to crawl through the mud for nearly an hour, enduring the pain of my broken arm, until I reached a road where a driver saw me and called for help. Mateo and his gang were never caught. They simply deleted the profile and vanished with my life savings. Today, the scar on my arm reminds me every day that I miraculously survived a predator who used love as bait. Valentine's Day is no longer a holiday for me. It's the day I remember that my life is worth more than any bank account. but also the day I learned that the most dangerous monster is the one with the most charming smile. This next story isn't just another report that reached me, it is a real-life case that shocked the entire country and made headlines in major newspapers and news outlets. It serves as proof that sometimes danger doesn't hide in dark alleys, but behind a kind smile, a Bible under the arm, and promises of eternal love. What you are about to hear is the chronicle of a calculated deception that destroyed dreams and entire fortunes under the mask of faith. To protect the identity of those involved, we will be using fictitious names in this story. At 45 years old, as a federal public servant, I thought I had seen it all and that it would be hard for anyone to fool me. I was always a woman of faith, dedicated to my work and my religious community, but in March of last year, I met Abel, a man who seemed to be the answer to all my prayers. I met him through a trusted friend from church. She had already done business with him and assured me he was a successful professional, a builder and engineer with a heart of gold and unbreakable faith. Abel didn't just have a smooth tongue. He had a presence that commanded respect. Always well-dressed, talking about million-dollar projects, and actively participating in the worship services. My big dream had always been to build a temple, a place dedicated to prayer and social work. When I mentioned it to him, Abel's eyes lit up. He told me he owned a major construction company and that it would be an honor for him to lead that project. "This is God's project, Laura," he would tell me while holding my hand after the service. Over time, his words stopped being just professional. He began to court me with a gentleness that made me let my guard down. He told me he was in love, that our union was written in the stars, and that he dreamed of us having children and a family based on Christian values. I, feeling lonely, fell headfirst into his trap. By October, my trust was absolute. He convinced me that to speed up the purchase of materials and secure the land for the temple, he needed a large initial investment. With the promise that he would pay me back in 2 months, I transferred almost 1 million reals to his supposed company's account. In my mind, I wasn't just investing in a building. I was investing in my future husband and my life's work. But as soon as the money left my account, Abel's mask began to crack. The calls that were once constant started being ignored. The temple's construction never went beyond a hole in the ground. Desperate, I began investigating on my own, and what I discovered was a nightmare. Abel's construction company was drowning in debt, with dozens of labor lawsuits from employees who were never paid. To try to calm me down, he offered a luxury house in a gated community as collateral, valued at 1.5 million reals. But when I went to the registry, I found out the house was not only mortgaged by a bank, but had already been sold to someone else. Abel was selling the same lie multiple times. When I confronted him, the sweet man who talked about God vanished. He turned into a monster. He screamed at me over the phone that I was a nuisance in his life and that if I kept demanding my money, he would use his influence to get me fired from my government job. "I'm only not paying you because you filed a legal protest against me," he spat with a hatred that made me tremble. That's when I went to the police. I found out I was just one more victim on a long list stretching from the federal district to the state of Acre. Abel lived a life of luxury, driving a Mercedes C180 and buying land. But nothing was in his name. He used his secretaries as fronts to hide his assets. Out of my million reals, I only managed to recover 30,000. He spent the rest on a life of appearances while I lost my life savings. Today, I have a court-ordered protection measure because the fear that he will carry out his threats is real. Abel is still free, defending himself with lawyers who say everything is a lie I made up to tarnish his reputation. But what hurts the most isn't the money, it's that he used faith in God's name to destroy my life. Valentine's Day is no longer a day of romance for me. It's a reminder that sometimes the devil doesn't come with horns, but with a Bible under his arm and a smile full of marriage promises.